Hello, Assalamu alaikum, and welcome to this edition of The Issues. This Issues is devoted wholly to the issue of Kashmir, and to discuss this with me, I'm delighted and honoured to have a seasoned journalist and an academic, Kirsten Seymour. Kirsten, welcome to The Issues.
Thanks, Harry. It's great to be here.
Lovely. It's wonderful. I know that you have a wonderful journalistic career. Well, let's find out a little bit about you for our viewers before we go heavily into the things that we're going to discuss, which is obviously the issues and of course and the program that you're going to be launching called The Pulse. So we'll discuss all those things. But first, briefly, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Well, as far as Kashmir goes, or Pakistan, I've been coming to the region since the late 90s. I started out actually studying poetry and writing, and that led me into journalism in Prague. And then I moved on to the Moscow Times, and then I kept broadly moving further and further into the region. So I went into Central Asia, and I started studying the Muslim Soviet republics. And I became interested in women's issues when I read a book on women in Afghanistan. And then, of course, all these things sort of married together, and I ended up at Oxford doing Russian studies, where I focused on Afghan invasion by the Soviets. And then I became increasingly interested in Sufism because of the poetry angle. And I really just fell in love with Pakistan. I've worked with, as a television reporter with, all the typical names, CNN, BBC, and I worked as a writer for The Economist.
You're stealing all my questions away from you.
Oh, sorry. Tell me about yourself. I feel like I'm in a...
No, I can't let you do that.
But anyway, I have been to Kashmir more than several times, and I have some interesting personal stories, like singing.
Well, we'll talk about Kashmir. Obviously, the whole show is devoted to the Kashmir and what you're going to do with your program, The Pulse.
Yeah, great.
When that starts on this. But, what we're intrigued about, what I'm intrigued about, and I hope you'll be able to tell me is, born in Texas, very big state.
You want to go back that far?
Born
My
in
life
Texas.
is not something you easily, just describe. I have like a million
No,
chapters.
but I'm just going to briefly touch on it. Big.
Just like a rolling
born in
stone.
Texas. Living in the UK, studied at Oxford, but totally in love with Pakistan. Where did this love grow from?
Well, I think that was an accident. But I tend to believe in things like my grandfather, who just passed this year, bless him, was part Native American Indian. So I grew up with a lot of spirituality, even though I grew up Catholic. And somehow I feel like there was some similarities in getting to know some of the tribal people, like the Pathans in particular, and wanting to keep their traditions and not have them sort of bleed out into westernization. And I really could appreciate that. The hospitality, like you said, I'm a Texan, and we're big lovers of food and guests and things like that, and you definitely get that in Pakistan. And it's so beautiful, and some of the greatest writers still struggle to really describe how you feel when you're in Hunza Valley. It's just breathtaking, and you forget that you have a mobile phone, and you just remember days where my children wouldn't remember this, but where you didn't need a mobile phone.
Well, I think I've seen your two children on Facebook the other day, dressed up in Pashtun outfits. So obviously they're besotted with it as much as you are.
They speak Urdu.
Wow.
They like to pray in the mosque. They're studying Islam, and they go to Swat Valley, and we're working on building a girls' school there.
Wow,
so
it's absolutely.
They love it.
Beautiful to hear all that. And
Yeah.
I think you put a lot of our people to shame as well, because I know a friend of mine. Her children are now like in their 30s. In the 20s, or should I say, and then they can't even speak Urdu or Punjabi, and they're Punjabis themselves, the parents.
Yeah,
so that's absolutely brilliant to hear what you're saying. Kirsten, you're starting. I said you're starting the program called The Pulse on these channels, and it's all going to be devoted to Kashmir. There's going to be a number of programs that you're going to do covering the history of Kashmir and all the conflicts that are going to take place. You know, tell us a little bit about the program. You know, what's brought this on? You know, why do you want to do Kashmir? What's the background to it?
There's two reasons of equal importance. One is that Kashmir is completely sort of in the shadow, and at the same time, I think it's possibly one of the most important regions as far as stability goes in the world, as far as conflict stability. For obvious reasons, they're both, India and Pakistan are both nuclear powers. They're also vying for different interests internationally, so lots of economic interest in India and lots of security interest in Pakistan, though I think they both resent that on each other's side for various reasons. But stability in the area, in that stage of Pakistan, India, and particularly with that, the obvious issue is Kashmir. And I think the world has turned their back on this issue for a long time. There's been all kinds of UN resolutions and stuff, but they're not not implemented.
What would you want to achieve from your programs? What would the end results of having?
I think the most important thing is exactly what we aim to do as journalists, ethic journalism, which would be to report information and to get information out there that people.
But that's the information is the hardest thing to get out, Kirsten. With all due respect, you know, India will not allow anybody in there to get the real information that is required in order to highlight to the world the atrocities that are being committed in this region.
Well, that's one of their strategies, is to push down the media, and that's exactly, you hit the nail on the head, why we want to do this show, because we're not going to be pushed down and we're not going to be held back. We're here in the United Kingdom. I have followed Kashmir for many years and I've seen atrocities firsthand, and it is something that shouldn't happen in the world if we want to uphold our international institutions and all the constitutional rights that go within those things. So I think this is an excellent time for it, because the world is now becoming far more global with the pandemic, with all kinds of interesting things we didn't expect to happen, and also having a lot more time at home and all the streaming of news. This is really a great time for the Pulse. Well, and to get this out, to get the story out.
Well, it will be fantastic to highlight the issues of Kashmir, of course, and the world is crying out for it. The world is crying out for it, but the people that need to do things are not doing anything. They are turning a blind eye, complete blind eye, to the issue of Kashmir. And I think you will cover it in your program. That issue, the Kashmir issue, is the most serious issue facing the world. Yet they don't think so. Why? Why is the penny not dropping that two nuclear nations are sitting side by side with Kashmir in the middle? And something else that we don't talk about, right? Something else that maybe you can, in this program, highlight. Why does China not come into it? China's got a portion of Kashmir, but why do we never speak about that?
Well, China does come into it, and China's actually sent troops in not very long ago. I think the world is really overwhelmed, and Kashmir seems like just another small pocket of controversy, and how does it relate to me? Westerners don't really identify something in an area called Kashmir to be anything beyond a beautiful scarf that they could buy at Harvey Nichols. They don't actually understand, a lot of people don't even know about, in the United States, wouldn't even know about partition, or that India used to be a broader area. So I think there's a lack of education. That's one of the, but I would disagree with you, however, that nothing is being done. I think that's a true statement, even maybe 2 years ago, but actually in the last year, 2 years in particular, and with Brexit and the sort of disintegration of the European Union, you now have lost all our MEPs, especially in the northern area of England that used to represent and be a voice for Kashmir. Those are now disappearing. So now, sorry, Harry. Sorry,
no. With all due respect,
let me just finish my sentence.
The MEPs have been there for 40 years.
Harry, Parliament now is taking that over, and that's all very new. So now, just yesterday in Parliament, you had lots of MPs standing up, and you had more than 3 or 4 standing up, talking about Kashmir specifically. So I think it is starting to become a dialogue is being raised in political arenas, even in Parliament. So I do think there's improvement in the last year or two.
But do you not think the underlying, the biggest underlying issue that we have in the United Kingdom is changing the foreign policy? And do you think that these the MPs now trying to speak up on Kashmir, that they are going to be able to change the foreign policy, because until we get a change in foreign policy, they're going to be saying the same thing. It's an issue between India and Pakistan.
I don't think they've ever said it's just an issue between India and Pakistan.
I can show you the letters from the Foreign Office.
Well, there have been representation. What I was talking about was European Parliament, and they have definitely put forward measures and had councils that actually put pressure to help out in Kashmir, and they had representatives specifically on that issue. And now with Brexit, we have, that's what I was saying, is now that that's gone, we're hoping, I'm hoping, that what we're seeing yesterday is a sign of what's to come, that vacuum will be filled. That vacuum, the post-Brexit vacuum, will be filled by MPs from various regions around the country that will speak up for Kashmir. And I think yesterday is indicative of a good start for that. Mm-hmm.
Well, we like to see everything that's positive happening for Kashmir, but as far as the British Parliament is concerned, I think 2017 we did a 3-hour debate on Kashmir, and there was a resolution which clearly was unanimously carried, which put the blame of the problem issue on the British Parliament, on the British, and the cause is back to the British. They've caused the problems. Should they not be taking the lead in trying to address what they've done wrong in the region?
I think they should probably take the lead in that respect. I mean, you wouldn't say exclusively, because obviously we have international institutions that are designed to tackle exactly things like human rights atrocities, and the Security Council and various constitutional methods like these have to be used, because that's what they're designed to do. They're not implemented. That's the issue there. But to answer your question, absolutely, because I think the biggest thing that Kashmiris feel is a real disdain for this sort of imperialism that had happened under British Raj, and how they were sort of left to the side, and they were able to be, even though they're the majority Muslim population in Kashmir, they basically were taken over and their land divvied out with the British, in charge. So of course, how can they not feel that? I mean, I remember walking through an area outside of Baltistan and having people hiss at me, English lady, young children hissing at me, English lady. So believe me, they're teaching it teaching it on down the generations. Even though I'm a Texan American woman, they didn't know that. So yes, you think you're absolutely right that these feelings run very deep, and I think just because of that, the way to heal that would be that the British, absolutely should take this very seriously. Okay,
well, thank you very much for that. I'm sure we'll cover a little bit more, especially the role of the United Nations, after a little break. We'll be back very shortly.
The issues of Kashmir have been eluding the world for a long time. I'm going to be bringing it out from the shadows. Why is the world ignoring Kashmir? And will the world continue to turn its back on two warring nations, both of which have nuclear capacity? And why hasn't the UN implemented its own resolution policy? And will it? And for all these questions, we will be digging for the answers to these tough questions. Please stay tuned for my new program, exclusive on Kashmir, The Pulse, with Kirsten Seymour. Watch for it.
Hello and welcome back to The Issues with me, Harry Boota. I'm joined with a very special guest today, and it's Kirsten Seymour. We are talking on the issue of Kashmir and the problems that are facing it and how they may be addressed. Kirsten will be doing her own program called The Pulse, going back in depth into the issues of Kashmir. But today, briefly, we're just sort of going through what her program is going to cover and what she hopes to achieve, what the outcome should be. I think one of the things that will be looking at will be the role of the United Nations, Kirsten. United Nations, what good is it? What do you think? Is it any good?
I mean, that's a debatable question, and I didn't mean to laugh, but I think probably a lot of the viewers might have laughed as well. Mm-hmm. The United Nations has obviously stepped in and had articles. They had a plebiscite original. They had a ceasefire, in 1947, which only lasted so long. There have been all kinds of concessions made between the United Nations on both sides. But interestingly, India tries to sort of override, like recently when they tried to override one of the constitutions, which gives self-determination to the Muslim majority. And of course, they've tried to give them autonomy as well. And they've recently tried to abolish it as sort of a punishment. So, so in doing that, it's sort of United Nations can put forward concessions and sort of be there like the grandfather, but unless they're implemented properly and respected
that's exactly my point, Kirsten. They've made these resolutions that's been there in black and white, the plebiscite for the Kashmiri people in black and white for over 70 years. These things have been there in black and white. But if an organization does not have the teeth to implement its own policies, its own resolutions, then what good is it?
Well, the problem is the United Nations, it's not like it's an institution prepared to immediately go to war. What methodologies they use for implementation, when both parties agree to a concession or agree to a new constitutional amendment or whatever, you would expect those two parties or factions to abide to those things, or to ratify them if necessary. But in the case of India, what you have is a complete non-participation and utter rejection of agreements. For example, flying, in 2019, flying into Pakistan airspace and shooting down part of a camp that they thought was Jaish-e-Mohammed. Well, that put an end to the standstill agreement.
But the rest of the world didn't do anything about it. It was just left to a little scuffle between India and Pakistan, which could have turned into a very, very, very serious incident. But the world kept quiet about it. India wasn't reprimanded by the rest of the world, were they?
Yeah, I love that you say that, because this is a question of really, in the Pulse, we seek to look for answers to these questions. Why is it something so serious, so important, and human rights atrocities on such an unbelievable level of rape and torture and disappearances of people? Absolutely outrageous.
If that was the kind of thing that was happening in the West, it would be just total and utter, all-out war.
It would be unthinkable that
so why? How can we stir the conscience of the rest of the world?
Well, I think if the pandemic has showed us, it's a great question, and I'm not sure I have the right answer, but if the pandemic has showed us anything, it's sort of shown this house of cards of Western government, looking at parliamentary government and looking at the president of Donald Trump. Am I allowed to call him former president just yet? But if you see the disarray and the actual dysfunction, and in the Western world, looking at how they handled refugee crisis, looking at how the European Union handled the pandemic, for example, they couldn't get any unilateral approach. So obviously the world isn't what we thought it was. It wasn't this great strategy of institution of coming together and equality and a sort of homogeneity of action.
Well, it can't be. But let me just put a quick question to you. Just highlight, it's only just come out recently that India has been waging a campaign of a negative propaganda.
Is this the information war?
Against Pakistan for the last 15 years. That has now come to the surface. Do you think the West will do something about it? Do you think the West will come out and speak up about it?
I don't know. I mean, the West they tried to speak out about it when Russia did something very similar in the United States elections. former elections. But this is a little more insidious because it's actually sort of trying to incite violence, and that gives it a whole different level. You know, it's very anti-democratic what was done by the Russians, and that was evidently done. But I think in this case, when it's 750 plus, and then it is also accepted by various NGOs that this actually has happened. PTI came up with all kinds of intelligence. I guess it was this morning or something, that verifiable acts of propaganda against Pakistan. And I think that is a corruption of our democratic principles insofar as the right to freedom of speech and these types of things that Pakistan holds and India hold to be true in their separate entities. So if India is going to claim this, I do think the international community will have to address it happening all over the world. But I think it's very unique in the case of what India has done because it's actually inciting violence.
Thank you. The last question, I think the United Kingdom in July this year enacted a global human rights sanctions regime, which gave it the power to stop those involved in serious human rights abuses and violence and violations from entering the country. Now, let's forget about entering the country. Let's just take the issue of serious human rights abuses and violations. Now, they can act internationally as well under this act of global human rights sanctions regime. Do you think having at the heart of the British government representatives or people with a background from India prevents them from taking action internationally against India for global human rights violations? Because clearly, with a lot of reports that have been issued, the United Nations report in 2017, 2018 again, another human rights violations report, and the British Parliament in 2018 December came up with a report as well on human rights in India. Lots and lots of evidence throughout, yet nothing. Nothing from this British government.
I mean, I don't think there's any doubt with, given Narendra Modi's agendas in the past and his open, unapologetic approach to violating human rights, that these things happen. I'm not sure in 2019, 2020, why there hasn't been as much of a reaction, but I would guess, again, it's down to the inability for nations such as the United Kingdom or the United States of America or European Union. They're in such, like I've said before, they're in such disarray themselves. They can barely manage their own laws or legal structures. They can't come up with a Brexit strategy, exit strategy. So I think until domestic issues in the Western countries are back in some type of order, it's going to be hard to extend out to great foreign policy and extending any kind of exemplary organization that's going to come from NGOs, it's going to come from the Amnesty Internationals, it's going to come from support groups and things like this. And I think really Pakistan is starting to have a very strong voice under Imran Khan internationally, and that certainly has given some credence to, and a little bit of a microscope and showing more about what Modi is really like. He's a tyrannical ruler, and I don't think
tyrannical ruler. I think that's what sums up what you're saying is that Modi is a tyrannical ruler, and a lot of my guests have said the similar things about Modi, but yet the world still panders to him. Even the United Arab Emirates have bowed to him as well. Which is really
I know you need me to go, but I was just quickly going to mention. I think part of that is the fact that there's been so much direct investment by America and the UK in seeing India as such a rising economic leader, whereas Pakistan is seen more as a security ally. and the economy and not wanting to lose all that investment, and that India is seen as, so it's economics.
Economics.
So that's what stops the West from really going against India, and Modi knows that.
So the value of humans is nothing to do
with... It's below the value of money. And
that's what wraps up the whole issue. The whole problem actually is economics. Thank you very much. We've come to the
Thank you, Harry.
We've come to the end, and final word from you before we go, Kirsten. What would you like to say?
Oh.
Give us the final word.
I guess I'd like to say peace on earth, happy holidays since Christmas is around the corner, and inshallah we can get more information out for the Kashmiris who really deserve finally to be heard. And thank you so much, Harry, for having me on your show. I love watching your show.
Thank you very much indeed. That's a huge honor from such a prominent person as yourself, and I'm really grateful. And I wish you the best for your program, The Pulse, and look out for it. It will be very interesting. And thank you very much for watching The Issues with me, Harry Boota. Until next time, Allah Hafiz.